Elrond had lent to Gandalf since his horse was not suitable for the mountain pass. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys and other much more dreadful things, and they were always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only about themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs and linked them all together in a line, and dragged them to the far end of the cavern with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the rope. There in the shadow of a large flat stone sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing round him, carrying the axes and the bent swords that they used. Now goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but though most skilled dwarves, and when they take the trouble, though they are usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongues, and also instruments of torture. They make very well, or get other people to make it to their design. Prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for some of their machines that have since troubled the world, especially the igneous devices for killing large numbers of people at once. For wheels and engines and explosions, always more than they could help, but in those days and those wild parts they had not advanced, as it is called so far. They did not hate dwarves, especially no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous and some parts wicked dwarves had even made alliances with them, but they had a special grudge against Thorin's people, because of the war which you have heard mentioned, but which does not come into this tale. And anyway, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it is done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. Who are those miserable people? Said the great goblin. Dwarves and this, said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain, so that he fell forward onto his knees. We found them sheltering in our fort porch. What do you mean by it? Said the great goblin, turning to Thorin. Up to no good, I warrant it. Spying on the private business of my people, I guess. These I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves are not likely. Come, what have you got to say? Thorin, the dwarf at your service, he replied. It was merely polite nothing. Of the things which you suspect and imagine, we have no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave and unused. Nothing was farther from our thoughts than inconvenient goblins in anywhere whatever. That was true enough. Said the great goblin, so you might say. Might I ask what you were doing up in the mountains at all, and where? I should like to know all about you. No, not that it will do you much good, Thorin, Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already. But let's have the truth, or I will prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you. We were on a journey to visit our relatives, our nephews and nieces, and first, second, and third cousins, on the other descendants of our grandfathers who live on the east side of these truly hospitable mountains, said Thorin, not quite knowing what to say all at once in a moment, when obviously the exact truth would not do at all. He's a liar. Oh, truly tremendous one, said one of the drivers. Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. Also, he has not explained this. He held out the sword which Thorin had worn. The sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth and clashed their shields and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time. When the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills, or did battle before their walls, they had called it Orkest, Goblin Cleaver, but the goblins had called it simply Bitter. They hated it, and hated worse anyone that carried it. Murderers and elf friends, the great goblin shouted. Slash them, beat them, bite them, gnash them. Take them away to dark holes full of snakes, and never let them see the light again. He was in such a rage that he jumped off his seat. He jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Just at the moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire of the pool went off poof into a tower of blue glowing smoke. Right up the roof they scattered piercing white sparks all among the goblins, the yells and yammering and croaking and gibbering and jabbering, holes, groans, curses and shrieking and striking that followed were beyond description. Several hundred wild cats and wolves being roasted slowly alive together would not have compared it with it. The sparks alive together would not have compared to it. The sparks were burning holes in the goblins, and the smoke that now fell from the roof made the air too thick for even their eyes to see through. Soon they were falling over one another and rolling in heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting as if they had gone mad. Suddenly a sword flashed in its own light. Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded in the middle of rage. He fell dead, and the goblin fled before the sword, shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. "Follow me quickly," said a voice, fierce and quiet. And before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again, as fast as he could trot. At the end of the line, down more dark passages, with the yells of the goblin whole growing fainter behind them, a pale light was leading them on. "Quicker, quicker," said the voice. "The torches will soon be relit." "Half a minute," said Dori, who was at the back next to Bilbo, and a decent fellow, for he made the hobbit scrambled on his soldiers as best as he could with his tied hands, and then off they all went and ran, with a clink of change and many a stumble, since they had no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long while did they stop by the time. They must have been right down in the mountain's heart. Then Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course it was Gandalf, but just then they were too busy to ask how he got there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burned with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. Now it was a bright as blue flame for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free as quickly as possible. The sword's name was Glamdring, the Foehammer. If you remember, the goblins just called it Beater, and hated it worse than Biter, if possible. Orcus, too, had been saved from Gandalf, had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things, and he thought, though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for friends in a tight corner. "Are we all here?" said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow. "Let me see. 1, that's Thorin. 2, Philly, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Where are Philly and Killy? Here they are. 12, 13, and here's Mr. Baggins, 14. Well, it might be worse, and then again, it might be a good deal better. No ponies, no food, and no knowing quite where we are, and hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go." On day when Gandalf was quite right, they began to hear goblin noise and horrible cries far behind them in the passage, and had came through. They sent them on farther than ever, and as Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, for dwarves can roll along a tremendous pace. I can tell you, when they have to, they took it in turn to carry him on their back. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these goblins knew the way better. They had made the pass themselves, and were madly angry, so that do what they could. Dwarves heard the cries and howls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of goblin feet, many feet, which seemed only just around in the corner. The brink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel. They were following, and they were getting dreadfully tired. "Why, oh why did I ever leave my hobbit hole?" said poor Mr. Baggins, bumping up and down on Bomber's back. "Why, oh why did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?" said poor Bill Bomber, who was fat and staggered along with the strap dripping down his nose in his heat and trailer. At this point, Gandalf fell behind and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner. About turn, he said, "Draw your sword, Thorin." There was nothing else to be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying round the corner in full cry and found Goblin Cleaver and Fellhammer shining cold and bright right in their astonishing eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The one behind yelled still more and leaped back, knocking over those that were running after them. "Bite her and beat her," they shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling back the way they came. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By the time the dwarves had gone on again, a long way into the dark tunnels of the goblins' realm, when the goblins discovered that they put out their torches and they slipped on soft shoes, and they chose out their very quickest runners with the sharpest ears and eyes, and these ran forward as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noise than bats. That is why neither Bilbo nor the dwarves nor even Gandalf heard them coming, nor did they see them, but that they were seen by the goblins that ran silently up behind, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. Quite suddenly, Dory, now at the back again, carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumped his head on hard rock, and remembered nothing more.